the file.
Yes,
Okay,
I am ready if everyone else is ready.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Michele. Let's get going.
Give me a second here to do this. And oops. Here we go. Can everybody hear me and can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
We good? Okay. So I'm hoping this isn't going to be too chaotic. Everyone has been ordered to stay out of this room, but I do have 2 college students here and a husband working from home. So hopefully we'll get through this and without too much interruption. So this morning we're going to talk about geometric abstraction, hard edge, and minimalism. And I just want to start here with a definition of abstract art. So abstract art is art that does not attempt to represent an accurate depiction of a visual reality, but instead uses shapes, colors, forms, and gestural marks to achieve its effect. And we're going to talk about a particular kind of abstraction, geometric and hard edge. Now notice there is going to be a lot of overlap here between hard edge and minimalism. They are not mutually exclusive. In fact, there's a great area of commonality here. And sometimes you'll see terms such as post-painterly abstraction. If you notice, our 2 textbooks actually approach this a little bit differently. Kleiner lumps everything under post-painterly abstraction, and then Craven in the book on American art does break things more into hard edge, color field, and minimalism. Now, Ali talked to us about color field, but there are 2 aspects of color field, the works that Ali showed us, and then the hard edge works that we're going to look at today. Now, in this photograph, we see a gallery exhibit of works by Kenneth Noland. So you can see here works that are considered both minimalist and hard edge. So let's move forward and see what that means. So we're going to start early on with geometric abstraction, which starts just after the turn of the 20th century, so around the time of World War I. So geometric abstraction consists of simple geometric forms in non-illusionistic space, meaning that it's pretty much 2-dimensional. There is no attempt to show 3-dimensional space or even objective reality. In fact, it's considered, for the most part, non-objective. And there's a great use of color, and I say here color as definition, meaning the color is the color. It is not necessarily, in a landscape you might have red flowers, green grass, and blue sky. In geometric abstraction, these colors don't correspond to, well, they're not symbolic, and they may just be flat planes of color. And more often than not, in these early times, it is the colors are unmodulated, meaning they have no value shift. They are one tone. And often you see dynamic composition games, playing with what's in front and what's behind in a still non-illusionistic space, and rhythm and interval. So some of the artists, well, the 2 artists mainly that we're going to look at are Kazimir Malevich and Piet Mondrian. And you'll see I have Stuart Davis listed here. He would not consider himself, nor would he be considered as really part of this tradition, but there are some aspects of his work that I want us to look at. So let's get started with Kazimir Malevich. So he was Russian, and he actually managed to work and teach through the Russian Revolution, which I didn't find much information on his life, but I thought that was interesting that he was able to keep doing that. And he came up with some theories. He really wanted to talk about what what is feeling beyond the cluttered world of things. So he looks, as you can see by these two works, we have white fields with geometric fields of color in front of this white field. So on the left, we have two floating squares, unmodulated tone. Again, we have this black square and this brown floating square that's at an angle. And on the right, we have this interesting composition of various geometric shapes. We have rectangles and lines, a circle there behind some of the shapes here. And then they all seem to be skewered together by this black line, and we have this teardrop shape in front. So notice that these are all distinct shapes against a white field. Again, the colors are unmodulated. They are just plain forms of color. He came up with this theory called Suprematism, which art as having supremacy over the forms of nature. And he considered these white backgrounds as a boundless state or even as a void. Now we're going to look at what he's most known for, which are these paintings. He did the black square first in 1915, and actually he did a series of black squares, but they're all pretty much the same, a black square in a white field. And then we have these white on white compositions, which he considered to be the suprematist composition. So the black square is within a white field, and this is a painted white field. This is not a white background on which he painted a black square. He painted them each as their own contained self, contained object. And we see, again, this white square, white floating square within a white field. Let's look at this more closely here. So there is some texture here. This is not modulated tone. I'm sorry, it's not unmodulated tone because there is texture. And we can see really two different colors of white. We see the whiter white in the interior square, and then the more off-white color around it. And again, I wouldn't think of this as background and foreground as much as it is object and negative space, and so we see, again, as I said, we see the hand of the artist, and there's a subtle asymmetry. Now, evidently, this interior skewed square is not perfectly square. That is something that I can't verify for you. That is something that I read. So, we'll just believe that. And again, in his mind, white is infinity. It's also a void, and it's also higher feeling and a pure form. So this is about, it's just under 3 feet square. And let's move on to Piet Mondrian, who is a Dutch painter, and he also was very theoretical. His influence was mainly Cubism, which, of course, I believe you've had lectures on Cubism. So that was Picasso and Braque in the early 1900s. And Mondrian studied in both Amsterdam and Paris, and so he would have been very familiar with Cubism. And he developed this theory. He was interested in universal values and aesthetics, and basically what is the theory of art. So as you can see, I've written here, harmony and dynamic equilibrium were important to him. And he was part of the de stijl movement, meaning the style. And he believed in the balance between the individual and the universal, and a balance between art and life. He developed this theory along with Theodore van Doesburg on neoplasticism. And I've outlined here what that is. It's the use of 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, 3 primary values, white, black, and gray, and 2 directions, horizontal and vertical. he felt so strongly about this that Van Doesburg at one point started using diagonals in his work, and Mondrian said, no, that's not going to work. And they actually had a split at that point because he wouldn't accept the diagonals. So let's look at this here. So we have these horizontal and vertical black lines, and then these fields of primary colors. We have the yellow, red, 2 dots, another small dot of red, and blue. And an interesting thing about this, you might assume, looking at this, that he's painted a white background and then painted the black lines and the colors over it. No, this is not what he has done. He has painted the black lines, and then the white is actually infilled in the same way that the colors are, the red and the blue and the yellow. Okay, so, and again, we see balance. The brightness of these primary colors, even though they're fairly small in area, the brightness and the saturation helps balance against the field or the white squares and the black lines. Now, he eventually moves to New York in about 1940. And this is a later work that he has done in New York. And you can see how he's evolved his style here. He was very influenced and loved boogie woogie music and the beat and the improvisation of it. And he captures that in this painting. You can see the black lines are no longer black lines. They are lines of color, of it's almost like they're tracks. And there's a beat and a syncopation to it with the red, the yellow, the gray, and the blue. And again, so he's kind of dropped out that black value completely here. We still see the primary colors and the white, and then this tone of gray. And I think this really wonderfully captures Manhattan and the vibrant beat of Manhattan. You see the grid, you get the sense of the blinking lights and traffic, the way these lines appear to move. And there's a great rhythm and vibration here. And you can see this is something that he wrote, destruction of melody, which is the destruction of natural appearance, and construction through the continuous opposition of pure means, dynamic rhythm. And this is one of his later works. I believe it may even be his, second to last work, second or third to last work before he passed away. Now we're going to move on. Again, I mentioned that Stuart Davis, I would not consider a geometric abstract artist. He was really doing his own thing. He studied with Robert Henry, and he was, again, highly influenced by synthetic cubism. And really, he's more in the tradition of cubism. But I want to show you this because, again, we have these black lines and these primary colors and these planes of pure color. This is our work. I believe you'll be getting a report on this, so I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. But you can see, again, Davis was influenced by music also. He was a great jazz enthusiast. So let's look at a couple of his other works. These are 2 still lives. He did a whole egg beater series where he placed an egg beater, a fan, a glove, and various objects on a table, and then he painted them over and over again. So you can see the Cubist influence, I think, here, but also you can see what we've been talking about as far as planes of unmodulated color. We have geometric shapes. Look at this wonderful diagonal line here and this division. Here we have a trapezoid in front of what would be a square, except he definitely painted these as fields of color. You can see in these reproductions a little bit of his impasto work. He tended to use very thick paint, and we'll look at that again here. This is our work. I don't believe it's hanging right now. but this is terrace. And you can see on the right, you can see he's still basing his work on objects, as we saw in the still lives, and in this painting, which is based on this newspaper photo of the walled city of Carcassonne, France. So he's taken that and he's abstracted it. And again, we have primary colors, this bright red, the yellow. There's no blue here, but we have this bright green, and again, we have the black. So you can see how he's taken this tree and abstracted it here. And I love the way that he breaks this format. He's created this format himself, but then he breaks it by bringing this green out into here. And again, we see the thickness of his impasto paint. So this is just a slightly different direction, but using a lot of the same forms. And he tends to be emotional and joyful, optimistic, modern. So there's a lot of feeling behind his work, which is actually very different than what is going to follow here. So let's talk about hard edge and what constitutes hard edge. So it's what you might suspect just from the name. So we have sharp, clear edges and abrupt transitions. And once again, we have areas of flat color, economy of form, and again, I include in that geometric shapes, fullness of color, often very bright saturated colors, but not necessarily. Impersonal execution, meaning that the artists aren't showing you the hand of the artist. They're very non-painterly. Smooth surface planes and design and structure, and often a system as to how these paintings are created. So there are a number of different practitioners of this. There was a group in California that put on this exhibit for abstract classicists. We're going to look at the work of Carl Benjamin. And then in New York, East Coast, we have Josef Albers, Ellsworth Kelly, and Kenneth Noland, and many, many others. I've just chosen a few because it could, be overwhelming. So let's start with Josef Albers here. He was actually born in Germany. He was on the faculty of the Bauhaus. He taught they had an introductory course on crafts and basically an introduction. And then he also taught stained glass. He was not a painter until later in life. In 1933, when the Bauhaus closed, he came to the US and he published this work in 1963, The Interaction of Color, which developed his theory of color. And you can see on the right here, we have 4 examples, and he painted these over and over again in the same format. These are all part of his homage to the square series, which he began in 1949 and continued until his death. They're all the same size. They're 18 by 18 inches. They all use the same 4 squares. They're all hard edge. You can see the different planes of color that meet each other in this hard edge again. But he didn't mask. He actually, he would draw the line and then he would paint up to it, but he did not use masking to create these lines. And one interesting thing that I didn't know until now was that he actually started with this square in the center. So down here in what's called ascending, he would have started with the yellow square and then moved out and painted each square. So this was just variation upon variation upon variation. And you can see he's given them subtitles. Here we have Apparition, La Tewana, Soft Spoken, and Ascending. And again, you can see that he's done these throughout a number of years. We have one, of course, in our collection.
Question?
Yes.
Yeah, without masking, how does he make these such perfectly straight lines with no overlap of the colors?
very carefully. You would have to, and you will see, actually we're going to look at Frank Stella, and you will see him doing that too without these precise lines. But yes, it can be done. But he would, I'm assuming that he would have drawn a pencil line or painted something with a hard edge below, which he is meeting. And so, yeah.
I can share something on this.
Yeah.
He painted on board,
Yes.
and the boards have the lines are in the board themselves. So if ours ever hangs again, you can see how he used the texture in the board itself to paint the lines.
Oh.
So he didn't have to mask.
Okay, thank you, Ray. That's correct. They are painted on masonite. So I hadn't thought about that, the texture in the board. So thank you for that.
But I also want to say there's a lot of skill. When you have a very steady hand, you're able to stay within your line, but it takes a lot of practice.
Yes, that's very true. And we'll see here, he just a couple of quotes from Albers. I think you may be getting a report on this, so I don't want to talk too much about it specifically, but he says, color, in my opinion, behaves like man in two distinct ways. First, in self-realization, and then in realization of relationships with others. And you can see, you know, all of these are about color in relationship to other colors. And in the end, the study of color is the study of ourselves, which seems a little esoteric, but he clearly saw in this an approach to life, not just an approach to color. So let's move ahead. So Ellsworth Kelly. So Ellsworth Kelly had a long and varied career, and we're going to look at him in two phases. We'll look at him here in this hard edge section,
Michele,
and then
can
we'll
I
talk
interrupt?
about him again.
Michele, this is Ravi here.
Yes.
Question. The how many homage to squares did paint? Do we know?
You know, I don't know. I don't know. A
About
lot.
1,500.
1,500?
Thank
Yeah.
1,500.
Okay. So Ellsworth Kelly, I thought it was very interesting. I read, you know, during World War II, he worked in this camouflage battalion. So camouflage was not, there were two aspects to it. There was the aspect where they were making the enemy think that we had a lot more troops and equipment. So one thing they would do would maybe be to create fake tanks and fake buildings and do things to create things that the enemy would see. The other aspect of it was to hide the troops and the movements of the troops, so causing them to blend in with whatever the landscape was around them. So he had a kind of a different way of looking at art. After World War II, he enrolled in art school. He studied at the museum school at the museum in Boston, and then he studied at Beaux-Arts in Paris. Now I have this rather grandiose quote that he wrote. So I think that what we all want from art is a sense of fixity, a sense of opposing the chaos of daily living. This is an illusion, of course. Canvas rots, paint changes color, but you keep trying to freeze the world as if you could make it last forever. In a sense, that's what I've tried to capture, is the reality of flux, to keep art an open, incomplete situation to get at the rapture of seeing. And I like this phrase. I feel like rapture of seeing really captures a lot of his work. Oops, sorry. So early on in his career, 1951, he was experimenting with collage, and these are all collage, they're paper works, and they're all about 8 inches square. He published this in a book. It was a series he called Line, Form, and Color. He was not able to get the book published. I think the book was finally published in the late 90s, but at the time, 1951, he wasn't able to do that. But working with this really moved him forward. And you can see here we have, hearkening back to Malevich, we have blocks of pure color, and then we have in the sense of Albers, we have experimentations of color in relationship. Again, he hasn't used the formal structure that Albers used. He changes his format and or not the format. He continually uses this 8-inch square format, but he change, whether or not he uses 3 colors or 2 colors, based on what he wants to do. Now, what he's done after he's done this series is he's taken those colors, all that colored paper that he's used, and he randomly I tried to figure out exactly what his process was. He's trying to keep the hand of the artist out of this, so he has come up with some method of randomly composing these pieces of paper, but I couldn't find it. Carl Benjamin does this, and we have the system. We know how he randomly placed it. I don't know how Ellsworth Kelly did it here, but he laid out all of his colors with the colored paper, and then he recreated it by painting separate canvases of each color. So he was using oil paint to match the color of his construction paper or craft paper. And each of these is a separate canvas. So we have 64 separate square canvases arranged on this wall. So this is called Colors for a Large Wall, and it's about 8 feet by 8 feet. So this is the ultimate in hard edge, right? I mean, the paint isn't even on the same canvas. The paint is actually meeting a hard edge of the canvas and then being placed against another hard edge. So this is what we call an additive composition, right? He starts with one and keeps adding and adding and adding. And he's used this grid. So you can see his quote here, I want to eliminate the I made this from my work. So it's purely non-objective. Get ahead of my notes here. And then this is something similar that he's done. This is a sculpture for a large wall. And again, we see these colored metal sheets. Now, we're no longer talking about squares. We're talking about, it looks like trapezoidal shapes that are actually shifted some, so that they catch the light from different directions. So we have some that are still I believe it's aluminum, silver aluminum. And then we have the colored pieces. And again, so this is by definition an object because it is a sculpture. But we have this random placement of colors, and we have the sense of balance. We have a sense of open space versus the object. So we have negative space and positive space. We have these interesting 3D angles, and we have reflection. I assume that if you're standing in front of this, you would be reflected in different ways in each of these panels. And again, this work actually belongs to our Museum of Contemporary Art here in San Diego. So red, blue, and green. And again, so we have 2 primary colors here, the red and the blue. And then we have this negative space that is created between them in this green field. And again, the form of my painting is its content. So again, he's not referring to reality, he's playing with colors. And we have this hard edge of color here, hard edge, and this curved hard edge between the two, and the colors are meeting. So we have a balanced composition here. We have, somehow this feels balanced, like equal, the red and the blue and the negative space of the green are all in relationship to each other and balanced.
Question? May I ask a question?
Yes.
Yes, Sandra here. Is it possible, just because these are sort of subjective for the viewer works of art, to consider the green which comes forward for me as the positive space?
Well,
Is
sure.
that a subjective thing? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I definitely see that coming forward as the positive in a way, and then the other one sitting behind.
Okay, yes. And actually a lot of this art, and we'll talk about this a little later, some more, is it is about our reaction to it as much as it is what the artist has presented to us. Now we're going to talk about, we'll talk more about Ellsworth Kelly later on, but at the moment we're going to move on to Kenneth Noland. And again, look at this. This is very reminiscent of Albers, isn't it? And he actually studied with Albers and did a number of these targets of different colors in relationship to each other. Now, not all of his targets, though, are hard edge. And this one, you can even see it's not a complete hard edge, but we do have that same kind of relationship between all of the spaces and the colors here. And I have this quote from him again: "I think of painting without subject matter as music without words." So again, it's about feeling, it's about your response to it. He also studied with Frankenthaler, who of course was involved with color field in New York. And he did a number of different series. We have the targets like this. He did chevrons and stripes. We'll see some of that later. And again, in the line with the hard edge work, he removed all texture, gesture, and emotional content from his works. Now let's look at someone closer to home here. Carl Benjamin. I didn't know this until I was doing the research, but Carl Benjamin actually taught at my college, and he retired just before I started school there. So I thought that was interesting. We didn't overlap. We missed each other by about a year. But he's self-taught in the sense he was an elementary school teacher, and he was told by his school district that he also had to teach art. Well, he had no training in art. So what he did was he got a bunch of crayons, handed them out to the students, and said, "I just want you to color for 45 minutes." And he started to learn from just watching what the kids came up with, and he was fascinated by that, and then began to learn to paint. So he's kind of the California edition of Ellsworth Kelly and Frank Stella that we're going to look at in a minute. As you can see, he uses these bright saturated colors. He used oils. He did not like acrylic paint. He preferred oil paint. And again, we see geometric shapes. These are all in this, in both of these paintings. We have trapezoids. And here we have, in this upper one, we have all of the trapezoids overlapping. And down below, this is our work. And so I'm hoping you'll get a report on this. We have the trapezoids are more floating in space. There is some overlap here maybe, or maybe they're next to each other. And he liked these patterns, and they kind of predate what we think of as pixelated forms, as we see nowadays on the computer, but they're these tiled patterns. And it was mostly, all of these people were reacting against abstract expressionism, Jackson Pollock, and this overflow of emotion, and where the process is the art. They're removing this process from their art. They're removing this emotion. And as Carl Benjamin says here, he said, all we knew, we just knew that we weren't abstract expressionists. So here's more of his now. And this is what I was talking about, the work that is the random squares. So he tells us here how he did this, how he composed this. So he has 24 rows of 24 rectangles. And he started with 8 colors and 3 different values of each of the 8 colors. And then each of these had a number, 1 through 24. And so he put slips of paper with 1 through 24 into a jar, and he had his daughter pull out. So she would pull out 5. And so 5 is maybe this I think it's hard to tell from this, is maybe a dark green color. And maybe 2 is this, yellow color next to it. So depending on what number she pulled out is what color he put down. And he says the only time that he overruled the chance was if he would have two of the same color in a row. So again, this is a way of removing choice in the artist from the work, though of course not completely, because he came up with the system, right? But he painted it according to the system that he defined, and so he is one step removed from the work as it is produced. And again, here on the right, we have a much later work of his. And again, so here we have trapezoids and triangles, and in a much more elongated form, and these hard edges up next, abutting each other. And again, very geometric shapes. And the bright colors, saturated colors. So we're going to talk about what we call minimalism here. Now, the two, as I mentioned before, minimalism and hard edge are not mutually exclusive. In fact, you're going to see an enormous amount of overlap. And again, this is a response to the emotionalism of abstract expressionism. And these artists were concerned with the actual painting as an object. And you'll see this appear in different ways, either by the enormous size of the painting or the way it is mounted to the wall. In all of these, they're objects as well as paintings. Again, we have simple geometric shapes. We have order in systems, like we saw with the Carl Benjamin, different ways of determining what the shape and look of the painting is going to be. Again, we have no symbols or hidden messages. The paintings refer to themselves. We have a minimum number of elements, colors, shapes, lines, and textures. And again, as we've seen, color is a material in the painting. And we see a lot of repetition and pattern. So we're going to look at these artists I've listed here on the right. We'll look again at Ellsworth Kelly. Actually, I have them a little out of order here. Frank Stella, Kenneth Noland, LeWitt, and then we'll look at some sculptures, Donald Judd and John McCracken. So here we have Frank Stella. Frank Stella is still alive. I don't know what kind of work he's doing these days, but these are his very early works, a series called The Black Paintings. Now, this is pretty minimal, right? I mean, we have one color. The white that you see here, these white lines, are actually the canvas. So he's not applied a second color of white. And he has a very famous quote, and I've put that here for you. My painting is based on the fact that only what can be seen there is there. It really is an object. All I want anyone to get out of my paintings, and all I ever get out of them, is the fact that you can see the whole idea without any confusion. What you see is what you see. And you will hear that over and over again in relation to Frank Stella. What you see is what you see. Now, he has given some of his work titles. So on the right, we have The Marriage of Reason and Squalor 2. And this, he's referring to how he was living at the time in New York. He's living in squalor, right? He's a poor artist, and he's using his mind. He's trying to learn art. And so in him, this is his phase of life. The marriage of reason and squalor is describing him. And then I'm sorry, I don't speak German at all. Defana Hook refers back to World War II. And we are going to look at how he composed these. So you can see the canvas is enormous, larger than life size. And he's come up with the system, okay? So here we have, we have two different patterns that he's determined, and these are just two of any number of paintings. So here we can see him applying it. So he's used a paintbrush here, and the width of the lines is determined by the width of the paintbrush that he's using. And again, he's very carefully painting one line and then another line next to it and with the canvas in between. So we have kind of this juxtaposition of system and handmade. It's mechanical in the sense that he's doing the same thing over and over again, but he's doing it by hand. And you can see that hand here in the irregularity of these lines. Now this is black enamel house paint. And again, he's separating, this is not an emotional experience. This is a system as he has applied it to the canvas. And we're gonna look at another system that he did. This is his protractor series. And he's done an enormous number of these. And you can see one of them here. This is Heron 2, created in 1967. And look at the scale. Here, I showed it to you with these two people standing in front of it. So you can see this is very, very large. And he sees these paintings almost as architectural elements as part of the wall. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the one that we have in our museum too. So again, there is a control and a structure to this. And we see the planes of unmodulated color. They're separated by white lines. And we see circular forms, but we see a repetition of forms, curves and squares. And he's very influenced by both Islamic and Celtic designs. We can see here, we can see him in his studio with a bunch of his works behind him. I believe actually we have a version of this photo at the museum, but it's not up on display. Now, he had a system for these. Okay, so here are the 27 configurations of the protractor series. So here I've shown you a protractor, and what he's done is he's come up with these 27 ways of arranging this protractor. And each of these configurations has a name, and each of these names refers back to a circular city in Asia Minor. And then each of these designs has 3 variations, which he calls interlaces, rainbows, and fans. And so you can see here all the different ways that he has arranged these. So the one that we just saw with Heron. So here is the Heron configuration, and you can see here, this is Heron 2. So the 2 refers to rainbows. So it is the rainbow variation. So we'll look at that here. We'll see 3 of the same variation. So these are the 3 Herakla variations. Number 1, this is the interlaced Herakla 1, the rainbow version, Herakla 2, and the fan version, Herakla 3. And this is the ancient city, circular city of Herakla in Syria. So this is very much a system, and he does this over and over and over again. But you'll notice all 3 of these use different color palettes. So he didn't limit himself in that way within the variations. Now let's look at these. This is a subset of the protractor series. He at one point was teaching in Canada, in Saskatchewan. You'll also see them referred to as the Saskatoon paintings. So here he was, and he didn't have access to the shaped canvases that he had, when he was doing these. Obviously these are custom-made shaped canvases. So he was working with squares and rectangles. So what this has done for him, it's created a different kind of painting, because now all of a sudden we have a negative space or what could almost be considered a background. It's not really a background because he's used it, the color is equal to the protractors. So he's, it's like foreground and background are equal, but there is this kind of leftover space. And you can see here on the left, this is the one that we have in our museum that I hope you're going to get a report on. And then we have another version of this, also called Flin Flon, that he did around the same time, where the protractors are inverted. And then we have a larger rectangle painting, a Lac L'Orange 3. And again, so here we have a combination of the circle and then this, well, almost, I suppose you could call it maybe a butterfly pattern. So here we see more of the Celtic influence, almost the interweaving of Celtic knots.
Can I ask a question?
And the other thing that you'll notice, and I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to take anything away from whoever's going to do the report, is you see in here, you see the white lines of the canvas. And he's clearly masked these. This is not like he did the black paintings where he, you know, he had almost the hand, you know, where you could see the hand of the artist in the raw canvas and the way the paint interacted with the raw canvas. That does not exist here, other than maybe the pencil line that is there. So, and you can see, again, you can see the variety of colors that he has used.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I don't see the when you say there's an implied foreground and background, I don't see that. So help me with that.
Okay, so I probably shouldn't use the term foreground and background because he's not really treating it that way. He is creating, you know, the color is equally saturated,
Yeah.
Equal in value to the portions that are the protractor. But if you look at this middle one, notice that we have this shape. Now, if he were in these, see he's curved, he has the curved canvas. So there isn't really this leftover space where when you square that off, suddenly you have these spaces and around the circle here, where in the other series, he maybe would have had, you know, the rounded canvas. Here, because he's working on a square,
Oh,
he
I
has,
see.
again, this other space that he needs to do something with.
I see.
He chooses to paint it blue. Yeah. Did that make sense? Did that answer your
Yes.
question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So back to Ellsworth Kelly here. So he's definitely oh, I know one thing I did want to talk about with this. So we talked about the idea of the scale of this, and I think we can really point this out because I think we're all familiar with this painting, correct? And you can picture it on the wall in the museum. Well, in the museum, you know, it's on a very large wall in a very large room, but this work is actually 9 feet by 9 feet. You could not put this in your house. Chances are, you know, the typical floor to ceiling height in a home in California is 8 feet. So we're talking about a very large scale again, and even not as large as some of those others that he painted in the other configurations. And we're back to that here with Ellsworth Kelly. So here we have simple. Remember, he had done all the cutouts of the paper and then pure squares of color. And so now we see another version of that, just 3 squares of primary color, red, yellow, and blue. And here he's gone so far, he's created new shapes. He's done what Frank Stella has done in a way. He has played with the shape of the canvas, and now these are objects in themselves. Not just paintings. This is, the colors don't work very well here. So we have a dark green panel, a red panel, and a dark blue panel. So they're very sculptural now. We have this plane of pure color on a shaped canvas that becomes a sculptural object. And minimal, again, this is minimalist. We see a minimal colors, geometric shapes. Here is some more Ellsworth Kelly. This is also, I've tried, when I can, I've tried to give you some of the dimensions. So this is about 7 feet by 5.5 feet. And we have this blue form on a white canvas. And notice how he approaches the edges of the canvas here. He touches the edges of the format. Not quite here, we have a little bit of white here, which I think adds to the tension of this work. And again, this isn't just a blue object painted on a white canvas. He has deliberately painted the white and deliberately painted the blue. And we have a balance of white to blue. And then we have the dynamism of the blue approaching those edges. And on the right here, we have this white angle over black. So we have actually two pieces. We have a black canvas and a white canvas. So the black canvas actually is raised out from the wall, and then the white canvas is placed on the black canvas and is raised forward. So again, we have an object. It's not just a flat painting, it is a created object. And these are, again, these are later in his career. And again, we have, notice, we have contrast. We have this very bright blue against the white, and then we have the white against the black. And again, even though this is curved, this is very much a hard edge. So, you know, we have this overlap between hard edge and minimalism. These are sculptures by Ellsworth Kelly. So again, here we have this simple geometric type form, an X, the two shapes together form this X, and we have this bright, vibrant orange color, and only one color. Now it creates a negative space here against this white wall and against the floor. And again, another sculpture, this is untitled, but it appears to be an ellipse or an oval that is folded in half. So we have a single geometric form that has been manipulated to create really two geometric forms. And then again, we interact with it as a positive space and a negative space here. Kenneth Noland, we remember we saw his Target painting earlier on. I actually took this photograph at the Huntingtons up north in Pasadena. And I saw this painting before I even knew really much about this kind of art. So I was glad I could find this photograph. So again, we have a shaped canvas, this diamond shaped canvas, and this repetition of color and these colored stripes, one after the other. And they're equal stripes. They're similar in value. And again, we have bright, saturated colors. And we have these relationships between the colors. Now, let's talk about the question that always comes up. Really, you could have painted that. So modern art, there's the idea in modern art of intention. So art is the product of the artist's mind as well as the eye and the process of putting it together. So, yes, you could have duct taped the banana to the wall, but you didn't. You know, somebody else did that and then decided to call it art. So, but we also have actually a much more sophisticated technique than what someone might say. I mean, I have actually had people, you know, say that to me. Oh, I could have painted that. Why is that art? So let's look. Here's Kenneth Noland here, and he is painting, probably not this painting, but something similar to this. So let's look at what all is involved with that. Well, first of all, there's the idea of what is the color? How does the artist decide what color he wants to use? We've seen a number of artists using a number of different theories and studying the relationships between colors. So that is a very artistic process to manipulate color in that way. And there is also, as anyone who has ever tried to paint, whether it's watercolor, oil paint, acrylic, or anything, there is how do you achieve the color that you want? Mixing the color can be a very difficult process, especially if you are trying to match a particular color. So then we have our materials. Are we going to use a custom canvas like the diamond shape that Noland was using? Are we going to use a square canvas like Stella was forced to use when he was in Canada? What kind of paint are we going to use? Are we going to use oil paint or acrylic paint or enamel house paint? Are we going to use a roller or a brush? And what is the technique of applying this? Are we going to mask? As you can see, Noland has done here. He's pulling off this masking tape that he has used to mask between the colors. Or are we going to do it by hand like Stella was using in his black paintings? How are we going to apply it? Again, are we going to use the brush or the roller? So all of these decisions, all of these choices are made by the artist. So let's look at one more painting by Kenneth Noland. Again, he's used a shaped canvas, but he's oriented his stripes in a different way than he did on the previous one. He calls this one burnt beige. I love this. He's got these fields of this beige color and then this little corner of the beige color on the over here. And notice this is one of his quotes. So unbalancing has its own order. It can still end up feeling symmetrical. And I feel like this work epitomizes that. There's nothing symmetrical about this. But somehow it feels balanced and symmetrical in the way that he has shaped the canvas and applied the different colors. And he called this notching the canvas. Even though I'm sure it's not a square canvas that he notched. I'm sure it had to have been constructed this way, but this is how he envisioned it, as a rectangle that has been cut away. So let's just real quickly, we're going to look at a few other people here. We have Saul LeWitt, another American artist, and notice how, so he's taking over the entire wall and he's doing 3 different things here. We have hard edge, and we also have this kind of minimalist black field and white, almost, it looks like chalk drawings. I'm sure it's paint though. And he didn't necessarily do these. He believed in coming up with the idea and having the intention, and then having a team of people create the actual work. He was less interested in the execution of his ideas. And we see some of his sculptures here, except that he didn't want to call them sculptures, they were structures. And so these are very minimalist structures. He uses the cubes stacked in different configurations. These are interesting. Being open like this, depending on where you stand, determines really what you see and what kind of negative space you see. Looking at it from an angle like we're looking here is different than if you were standing on this edge and looking at it, or if you're looking at it from above looking down, or if you're down on the floor looking through it. They're all different experiences. Oops, sorry. Donald Judd, again, he didn't like the term sculptures. These are objects. He did this here, this untitled. He did many, many, many versions of this in different colors, different heights, and different installations. And this also untitled, this is copper alloy, a box, basically. So again, minimalist, reducing things to a geometric shape and color. And again, this is John McCracken. This is in our museum, and I hope you're going to get a report on that. I did want to show you, though, what a bunch of these look like together in one installation, and that he did use many, many different colors. And here we have one strato in this blue. And what I'm showing you here is, you can see the reflection. These are very highly polished, sleek surfaces. He's very much part of the custom car and surfboard culture here in California. These are handmade planks, wood with many coats of resin, fiberglass and resin, which he has hand polished. And they're all about, again, the surface, the polished surface and the color, this monolithic color. You notice they're all sitting on the floor. That is one thing in our museum, we have it on a pedestal. And I think that is for practical reasons. But he very much saw these planks as interacting between the space, the three-dimensional space of the viewer, and the wall, which is the space of art, right? That's where we hang paintings. And then these last two slides are just for fun. So I just compiled a whole bunch of different stripes. You get online, there are thousands and thousands of hard edge stripe paintings, but there's an infinite number of variation. So I just wanted to show you that quickly. Some of these that we've looked at the artists. We have Stella, Carl Benjamin again. We didn't look at Gene Davis at all, but Saul LeWitt, Ellsworth Kelly, and Noland again. And then just for fun, a bunch of different versions of white, though I am going to tell you up front, Agnes Martin considered herself an abstract expressionist. So, but she did do these white squares. And I wanted to show you this installation of all of these white squares in relationship to each other. Again, here's Albers. Again, he's got his different colors of off-white here in his format. So, so that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, I have
I
questions.
noticed one woman. Oops, sorry.
Oops.
Go, Olga, go.
So I only noticed one woman. You said Agnes Martin,
Yeah.
female minimalist artist, or did I miss?
No, she's really the only one I showed here. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I realized that when I got it all done that I had neglected to include more women. But yes, and there are many, many artists practicing in this field. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
I have 3 questions, okay?
Okay.
One of them is about something you said with, what's his name, Malevich, right? The Russian guy?
At the beginning,
Yeah, near the beginning. You said something, you said a line about, you said white is infinity and the void and a higher feeling. I don't know what you mean by higher feeling.
By higher feeling.
That's what you said, yeah, higher feeling. White is in the realm of higher feeling. What does that mean, higher feeling?
Well, that's the way Malevich thought of it. He thought that somehow by having this color, and he felt that way about the black also, is that somehow you were able to enter into a higher state of feeling. And this was what he was trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So he somehow felt that this was a higher form. Somehow it was getting you away from the clutter of life around you so that you could have this pure moment of feeling.
Okay. Okay, I see. Okay, here's the next question. My next question is a very practical question, and it has to do with that Carl Benjamin. And you don't need to find a painting because I'm just asking the question. So
Okay.
he made the comment that there were 24 different colors, and he put colors on 24 different pieces of paper, and his teenage daughter pulled them out of the hat, and he went with whatever she pulled, except when she pulled the same color. Well, how could it have been the same color if there are 24 different tabs and he puts them in a hat and she pulled them out 24 at a time?
Okay, well, say you're doing the top row. So you've done the top row and then you start over again, maybe on the second row.
Oh, I see. And if you put the 24 back in the hat, but if she pulls up the same color as ended the top row, he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, yeah. He didn't want 2 of the same color next to each other.
Okay, okay. Okay, so the next thing is more a general question for the group, because I'm trying to figure this out. And so some of the things, like, for example, the one with the Russian guy and the higher feeling, I mean, for me, for some of them, I have a response, right? That sort of does something to me. But a lot of it does not do it for me. And so what I'm wondering is, just talking to the group, is what are some responses that you have to some of these works that really connects you with them and makes you like them so much that I could understand, to try to understand the impact of the works. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, Courtney, one of the things is, this is kind of what a lot of this is about, is creating a reaction. And there is no right or wrong reaction. Maybe your reaction is boredom or anger, or maybe your reaction is calm or peace or joy, but everyone's going to have a different reaction. And the next step after that is to look at the work and decide why you're reacting the way that you are reacting to it. And so, which makes each of these a personal experience for each person looking at it. So, but I am interested in what other people have to say about that too, because people have a lot of opinions about this.
I can say something. So you have up on the screen at the moment, on the right, that palette of colors. I don't know. I know pleasing colors would be subjective, but I think that there's a prettiness or a harmony about those colors, and I'm always disturbed by the combinations that Frank Stella puts together, and they're disturbing. And it's like, does he wish to evoke this kind of feeling, or are they just so random the way he chose them that they don't seem to harmonize to me? I don't know. I just find
See, I find that really interesting, because I feel, when I look at the Frank Stellas, I do feel harmony. To me, these colors do work together. So again, yeah, it's a personal interaction with the work. And he would have told you that that is entirely appropriate, is you see what you see. And that means you yourself, you see what you see. And yeah. So, and again, you see, and this is why you see so often, you see these artists playing with colors and doing all of these color relationships, like the Albers and Ellsworth Kelly, because they're looking to see how do they feel about these colors in relationship to each other. And then your response to it is your personal response. Yeah.
But these are prettier, the Heracles, for me, pretty. It's a silly word to use, but that more harmonious than the Flint ones. But
then these? Okay.
These seem nice to me, actually. Harmonized.
Anybody else? Okay.
Well, Flin Flon 8 I really like, but the colors on the screen right now don't really capture the colors that we see in the gallery.
That's
and I really like the colors that we see in real life in the gallery.
Yeah, that's the inherent problem with doing these PowerPoint presentations. But yes, that's very true, Ray. This is a much harsher, contrasty version of the painting than what is actually there.
Seems like
I
scales,
feel like, okay, sorry.
scale's the other issue. I mean, when you see the painting in by 3 by 3 inches, the colors are very different than when standing in front of something that's 8 feet by 8 feet, where you're absorbed with the color, or you rarely see the whole thing at one go if you're standing close up.
Well, and that's an interesting thing to do in the gallery when you're showing this, is to often start way back so that you can get an idea of what it is as a whole, and then approach it halfway across the room, and then in the end where you're standing right directly face up to it, and you can see it in those 3 different perspectives, and you just see different things about it in each different location. Anything else?
I'd like to discuss something. Years ago, I read that all art is abstract, and that has kind of stuck in my head. And now whatever we saw today is mostly geometric, very few curved lines other than the custom canvases and so on. Now a painting like what we have at our museum called 3 Figures in a Landscape, would you call that abstract? Because it has few lines, has flattened space. I think of it as abstract, but can I boldly say that that is abstract?
Now I'm having a hard time figuring which painting that is.
I think, are you talking about the one in German Expressionism?
Right. I think of it as abstract, but I don't see any reference to it in today's lecture.
You're right, because abstraction doesn't have to be completely unrecognizable. there's a continent between totally representational and total abstract, and there's something in between. So it is abstract. It's a partially abstract, so we can still say it's abstract.
Okay, like Matisse's painting with some of those, you know, the sketches that he draws. So that could be called an abstraction?
Yeah, they're, even though you recognize something, they're still partially abstract, so you can still say abstract.
Okay.
Yeah, Vanita, I wanted to just clarify. Michelle's talk today wasn't about all abstraction. It was about just geometric hard edge and minimalism.
Geometric,
so
yes.
There is a more organic kind of figurative abstraction, which is still abstraction, but it is a whole different branch of it. So that's the one you're referring to.
Yes.
Belongs to that category. So yeah, you're perfectly fine using the word abstraction with that painting of three figures.
Okay.
Yeah.
So because I don't want people, when I say, let's look at this abstract art, I don't want people thinking that I'm going to take them to something that looks more geometric. But it's okay to use it. I just wanted to clarify that.
Sure, I mean, you can qualify abstract with an adjective, like, you know, geometric abstract or figurative, if that helps.
Okay.
But I mean, think about the Modigliani portrait of the young boy, that's abstract. There's Red Blossom.
Right. Okay.
Red Blossom by Jovlensky, that's abstract in its way, but it's figurative abstraction as opposed to geometric.
Okay, I'll qualify it then.
Yeah, I mean, there's many, it's a big umbrella and there's a lot of different varieties.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Jim, is it partly related to the artist's intention?
Sure. Yes.
So, I mean, more than just expressing it. So Van Gogh, when he does some of his trees, for example, we recognize them as trees, but they're not realistic. Would that be abstract?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's very often an abstract element to, and all of these things are a spectrum. So maybe Van Gogh tree is abstract, but it's not as abstract as a Cubist tree or you know, whatever. So there's like a spectrum that I would say. Can I just add one little thing? I think that was fabulous, Michele. I always hate to be the nitpicker, but I just want to correct the pronunciation of Mondrian's first name. It's Pete.
Oh, okay.
Like it was P-E-T-E. You don't say the Piet. It's Pete, just plain old Pete. Okay?
Okay, how about the Malevich? I didn't know how to pronounce that.
That was pretty good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a hard E. Malevich, yeah.
Okay.
The Russians among us can correct us on that.
Yeah.
I think it's Kazimir, right? Isn't the accent in the middle?
It's Malevich.
Yeah.
Malevich.
Malevich, yes, but on the first name. Kazimir, is that right?
Casimir.
Casimir, okay. Accent on the, yeah, okay. But yeah, so these are little tricky things. So it's good we have so many polylingual folks in the group here that can help us out with pronunciations. Anyway, hats off to Michele. That was a wonderful, beautiful.
Thank you, Michele.
Thank you, Michele. Wonderful. Thank you.
Can I say something about abstraction? Yes.
Yeah.
When I use the word abstract, I only use that for something that is completely abstract. Otherwise, I say it's abstracted. So when I'm pointing out something in a painting that's not an abstract painting, but it's got a distortion or something like that, I refer to it as an abstraction or that it's abstracted. And that, I think, keeps you from calling the whole style abstract.
I think that's a way to talk about it. I also use partially abstraction, you know, so people recognize something, but it's not total abstraction.
For me, it's most helpful to think about abstraction if we're talking about abstraction that's from something in our universe as a continuum. So things are slightly abstracted, more abstracted, completely abstracted. There's also non-representational abstraction, which is what Michele was showing us today. So there's abstraction that is representational, and there's non-representational. I think a continuum is really easy for people to understand.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I guess we need to take a break. We'll be back 11:30 for gallery exercise.